Hey class, we're starting a new section of applied ethics. We're going to be talking about creation care, or it's often referred to as environmental ethics. Like all the major moral topics, it's controversial. I want to remind you to keep the conversations good, positive the way they have been, to be honest with your views, but also be kind. Because I'm guessing we're going to disagree. At least some of us will disagree with some others, and that's a good thing. That helps us to think. It helps us to look at our own views and to reflect on them. Why do we hold the views that we do and not others? Do we have good reasons for our beliefs? The way that the applied ethics sections have gone, right, we're going to read a few philosophers on these topics that take various views. And then towards the end of the week, we'll look at it from a specifically Christian perspective. How might we think about this in terms of Christian ethics, at least looking at it from a particular Christian perspective. So I think it'll be very interesting. Some things about creation care, when we talk about the ethics of it, it's huge, right? It's like talking about global economics. There's just so many facets. What's the right way to deal with various countries economically? How do we deal with economics within our own borders? So it just becomes so vast. Well, when you're talking about the planet, you're talking about creation, you're talking about the environment or nature, lots of different issues come up, which we can't touch on all of them. So we're going to try to cover some general moral issues that relate to these, right? So some of the topics, right? Limited resources versus human needs. So we have a limited amount of food, a limited amount of forest, a limited amount of rain every year, a limited amount of oil. We have all these limited natural resources. They're not unlimited, but we have these increasing needs. Humans want to eat, and population growth. We want to drive cars and fly planes, and we want to have air conditioning. All of this requires energy, which is a limited resource. How do we balance this? Right? How do we balance the human need and sometimes human wants with limited resources? How do we make those decisions morally? Right? Which is more important? Is the clean river more important, or is the factory up the river that employs thousands of people more important? You know, those sorts of things. Very difficult. There's issues of pollution. Welfare for future generations, it's always an issue. All you need to do is look at an aerial view of LA or Mexico City or any number of places to realize pollution's gone up a lot over the last 50 years, over the last 100 years, exponentially. So the pollution is, again, part of human needs. We want to travel, and factories put out pollution, and planes and cars and all sorts of things. So what's our moral obligation to the future? Is it okay for us to increase pollution, air quality going down and whatnot, knowing that in 100 years humans will be fine, but what about 1,000 years if we go on this current pace? Do I have any moral obligation to future generations, or do we not consider that an issue? So how do we balance some of these very delicate topics? Climate change and global warming. So another issue is it's clear that the Earth temperature is going up. That's not disputed. Ice caps melting. We know that hurricanes are getting more frequent and worse, so there's like superstorms emerging. There's all kinds of things that are taking place with climate change. So how do we deal with that? There's dispute about whether this is a naturally occurring thing. Does the Earth go through cycles naturally, and humans aren't really causing the warming? Or is it directly the result of human activity? And if it is, what responsibility do we have to ensure that we don't create a situation where climate change becomes too destructive? Many people suggest that this is an issue of justice for the poor as well, because as climate changes and resources get scarce, the people that will get hurt the most will be the poor. Wealthy people will find a way to protect themselves or to survive, but those in third world countries can't protect themselves from the elements nearly as well. And so there's an issue of social justice wrapped into some of the environment stuff as well. you can see how it gets very complicated quickly. There's issues of animals, right? So creation care includes non-human animals. How do we treat them? Do we have any moral obligation to animals at all? Do we want to protect species from going extinct? Should we even care? Are animals only here for human use? Or do they have value and should be treated fairly or justly, morally in some way? So what moral obligation do we have toward animals, toward endangered species? This includes issues of diet. All of this diet would be included, right? But with animals, is it okay to cause the greatest possible pain, namely death, for something like a human convenience, like it tastes good? I really like it. If we don't have to give any moral weight to animals, then clearly that's fine. If animals have some moral weight, then maybe we have to rethink what we eat and what we consume, how much of it we consume, and all that. Wilderness and ecosystem preservation. So again, issues like deforesting, wildlife, wildlands, animal habitats. What if we introduce, like wolves have been introduced to Idaho from Canada, and they wreak havoc on the elk population? So do we have a moral obligation to preserve ecosystems, to get rid of those Canadian wolves, to try and create a sustainable ecosystem in Idaho that's been around for a long time? So some people advocate shooting wolves, actively hunting them down. Others, it's too late, the wolves are here. We're not going to protect an ecosystem, we're going to protect the animals instead. So again, various moral issues regarding these things. Again, we could list lots of examples. Global population and sustainability. The population continues to grow as medical advances expand human life expectancy in every part of the world. People live longer, more people on the planet. Can we continue on this trajectory? Can we feed everyone? Can we provide a decent quality of life for everyone as things continue to grow? Can we provide jobs for everyone? Is this sustainable? What do we do about it? China, as you know, has moved to a situation where their population is unsustainable in their mind, so they make a law against having more than one child, and you're actually taxed pretty heavily if you have more than one. So they've tried to take a legislative route to this. So do we have any obligation to resolve these problems, and how would that look? And of course, food production and allocation. Can we produce enough food? How do we distribute it? The United States, small percentage of the population, we eat a large percentage of the food. We overeat, we throw stuff out, go to any restaurant at the end of the day. You know, is that immoral? And not just us, Europe, other first world countries consume a ton of food. Other places go hungry. How do we do that? How do we work that? So here's where we'll get into some key issues, right? So it's a giant topic. We could go in almost any direction when we're talking about creation care. We're going to read articles that look at different facets, but I want to get some of the just major moral topics on the table, right, so that we can start to have some clarity here. Normative versus descriptive. You'll remember from early on in the class, descriptive is just, here are the facts. This is the information. I'm just describing something. Normative statements make a judgment. They make a moral judgment. This is how we ought to behave. This is what we should do. Description is, this is what's happening. Normative, what ought we to do about it, right? You can imagine how both are relevant. So there's a set of information about climate change or global warming. How many degrees has the Earth's crust heated up over the last 50 years? That's a descriptive claim, right? Scientists are working to answer that. Are humans responsible in some way for it, our activity? That's descriptive. That doesn't say it's right or wrong, good or bad. It's just, are we responsible or not? What does the evidence say? How many spotted owls are left in the redwood forest? Whatever. That's a descriptive statement. So those matter. We need to know the information. We need to know the evidence. How many hurricanes are happening per year? Is it increasing or decreasing? Are they stronger or weaker? Is it the result of water heating over the ocean? How much has the population grown? How much food is there? All descriptive. That matters, but then for this class, the more important question is, what should we do about it given the information? So if the information is humans are somewhat responsible and best evidence says that that's true for climate change, for instance, do we then have a moral responsibility to change our behaviors? Or do governments have a moral responsibility to institute legislation to help curb it? And those are normative questions which are different. Some people might say, yes, here are the facts. We might all agree. But then you might get 5 different positions about what should be done about these facts. What is our moral obligation? We can talk the same thing about normative things with regard to animals, right? We can know how many they are, how much protein they provide us, the nutritional value. These are all facts. But then normatively, is it okay to eat them? In what situations? Is it okay when it's necessary for humans to survive, like in places where there's very little vegetation? But maybe if you have an abundance of food options, like I can just go to Albertsons, maybe then I shouldn't eat meat, right? So there might be these normative claims that are made in the midst of it. So it's information descriptive versus moral argument normative, right? And I argue that many Christians, at least in the conversations I have, spend a lot of time disputing information, right? So there's a lot of argument about, is the earth warming? Are humans responsible for it warming? Are these endangered species really endangered, right? How many earthworms really are going to be killed with this new excavation project? I mean, there's a lot of argument about the facts and the information, which is fine. What that means, though, is if we stay on that, is Al Gore telling us the truth or not, whatever this debate that Christians have, we never start to ask the larger questions that are important to me. I want to talk about moral issues, right? How should we think about creation, God's creation? How should we value it? How should we treat it? How should we be stewards of it? What are our obligations to the gift of creation that God has given us? These are huge moral issues. How should we treat and think about animals, right? Part of God's creation. Sentient creatures, right, that think, feel pain, procreate. What obligation, if any, do I have to them, right? What is God's purpose for creation? So we have the natural world, we have animals and all kinds of things. What was the purpose there? These are big issues that I think are often get neglected because we're too busy talking about information, disputing that, and we're not digging down to the ethics. So hopefully we'll be able to talk about the ethics in this section. So for instance, does creation, animals, the natural world, etc., have intrinsic value? Big question. If you remember back in class, intrinsic value means valuable in and of itself, right? Does creation have intrinsic value? Maybe because it's part of God's creation. God looked at it, said it was good, right? Some people would say creation has intrinsic value because God created it, it comes from God, it bears part of God, and God said it was good. Other people argue, no, creation does not have intrinsic value. It's not valuable in and of itself. It only has instrumental value. And if you remember, instrumental value means it's valuable because it gives us other stuff we value. So many Christians, many people in general, want to argue nature has instrumental value only, so trees are valuable in as much as they provide paper, housing, oxygen for humans. It's valuable because humans can use trees as an instrument for other things we value, like shelter, food, oxygen, life. Animals are valuable as instruments for humans to provide us food, to help us work the land, like horses or cows or steer, right? They can help us do work, transportation, food, but they don't have any value in and of themselves. They're not intrinsically valuable, only instrumentally valuable. This is a huge question in the debate. No one denies that nature has instrumental value. We all agree, right? Trees provide oxygen, instrumental value. Trees provide fruit, instrumental value. Animals provide food, instrumental value. Animals help us work and help with all sorts of things, transportation and whatnot, instrumental value. They provide clothing, like sheep's wool, instrumental value. No one disputes. The real dispute is, does creation, animals and nature in general, have any intrinsic value? That's the real debate. Is it all instrumental, Or is there some instrumental, which no one disagrees with, and some intrinsic? Vital question. Because if we argue, if you believe that nature has intrinsic value, the moral status immediately jumps. Our obligation towards nature gets higher. The ways in which we treat nature, right, can be just or unjust because of the value given. So we have to think through. It's a huge moral question, right? What should our attitude be toward creation and therefore our behavior? Another key question, right? Does creation have moral status? When we say moral status, what I want you to think of during this section is, do they have moral worth? Should we give it moral concern? Like, I crush an ant that's in my house, like, right? I don't think it really has much moral status. Obviously, by the way I treated it. I crush it. I don't think twice about it. I wash my hands off. That's the end of it, right? I crush it with my foot or my shoe or something. I'm essentially, by my behavior, saying I don't think an ant has moral status. It doesn't concern me morally. I can do whatever I want with an ant, and it's fine, right? If that's true, there's no moral status, then even if you see a kid with a magnifying glass burning ants with the sun, right? The sun comes down through the magnifying glass and burns it. I used to do that as a kid. You would say, well, they're not doing anything wrong. We're just being kids because ants don't have any moral status. My guess is if you saw kids torturing a dog or a cat, you would stop them because something inside of you would say that's wrong. If that's true, what you're saying is that dog has moral status. We have certain things we should not do to that dog. And there are certain things we ought to do, like feed it, care for it, show it some kind of affection. Does creation have any moral status? Do trees have moral status? Does a river have a moral status? Do insects have moral status? Do cows have moral status? Do dogs have moral status? Do we have any regard for them morally, right? Various views. So there are various ways of answering this question. Does creation have moral status? Option number one, anthropocentrism. This is a long word that means something very simple. Anthropocentrism just means human-centered, right? Focused on humans, anthropods. So this view says, only humans have moral status. The rest of creation is only valuable instrumentally. Humans have intrinsic value, have moral status. The rest of creation has instrumental value. We only concern it to the extent that it impacts humans. So we don't want to go around killing a bunch of animals for fun, given the shortage of food in the world, because that concerns humans. What we should do is be killing animals so that we can feed people who are hungry. So it's not that we care about the animals and whether they die or not. We care about how we could use the animal's death to help humans, because that's what has moral concern. We don't really care about the air or the river or trees, but we don't want to do too much bad, because if the air gets too polluted, humans are affected negatively, and that's what we care about. And if there are no trees, we don't get that oxygen produced or that fruit produced, and that affects humans. So we care about the environment only to the extent that it impacts humans. Another view is called zoocentrism. This suggests that all sentient creatures have moral status. You might say something like, humans, we're sentient, we can feel pleasure and pain, hopes and dreams, we have telos and goals we try to achieve, therefore we have moral status. But so do animals. Animals can feel pleasure and pain, they try to avoid pain, they go after pleasure, they have a set of goals that they care about, whether even if that's just procreation and survival. And so because they're part of this living universe, we extend moral value, this view says, to both humans and non-human animals. But something like a tree, something like a river, not sentient, a virus is not sentient, right? So low life forms, plants, not. But as we move up in terms of awareness, pleasure and pain and whatnot, we start to give moral status to more things than just humans. Biocentrism, all living things have moral status. Now we include trees, viruses, fungus, anything that has life, right, has moral status, and should be considered. So now we can't just chop down a tree if we want to. We have to think about, is this a necessity? Do humans need this, or is this a luxury, right? So now we have to start really thinking about how large our homes are and how much wood and limited resources go into making our 5,000 square foot mansions, right? Because we shouldn't be doing that if what we only need is 800 square feet. We could respect the natural world much more by cutting down on the food we eat, right? This would include zoocentrism, and biocentrism include probably vegetarianism, just so you know. So if you're a zoocentrist, my taste for meat cannot override the cow's desire to live. It's a preference for me. It tastes good. It's a necessity for them. It's their life. So zoocentrists, because they're giving value to non-human animals, would want you to, if it's possible, to not eat meat. In the United States, we can live without meat. In third world countries, meat might be a necessity, and at that point it might be okay, but only as a necessity, right? So same with biocentrism. They would include the vegetarianism, but they would expand moral status to all life, not just animal life. So we really have to think about like spraying Roundup on something, on grass you want to kill or get rid of, right? Is poisoning that a necessity? How do we live in harmony in some way with the natural environment? Now, biocentrists, there's two forms, right? You've got egalitarian biocentrists and non-egalitarian. Egalitarian biocentrists are the radical biocentrists where human life is no more valuable than any other life. Human life is not more valuable than a dog's life or a lizard's life. Life is life. My life is not more valuable than a tree's life. It's biological egalitarianism. I'm supposed to live in as much harmony with creation as possible, destroying or impacting negatively as few living things as possible, right? Non-egalitarian biocentrists say, well, no, all life has value. All creation has value. However, some things are more important than others. So typically humans are the most important. Then you have non-human animals. You might get down to insects, other things, trees, right? Plants and whatnot. Virus, fungi. So you've got this hierarchy, and that means if a human needs to eat other living organisms to survive, the human does that. But only that which is necessary. So I'm not going to eat meat if it's unnecessary, right? I'm more valuable than an animal, so it's about my life versus some other living thing's life. I win. But I can't just walk around thinking everything has instrumental value, right? The key here is zoocentrism says humans and animals have intrinsic value. The rest of nature has instrumental value. The biocentrist says all life has intrinsic value. If you're an egalitarian, all life forms have equal intrinsic worth. If you're a non-egalitarian, you're saying, yes, all of creation has intrinsic worth, but some have more intrinsic worth than others. More moral status, a higher moral status. And then finally, you have ecological holists. The zoocentrism, biocentrism, all that focuses on individuals, the individual human versus the individual animal or tree. The ecological holists say, we're not going to look at individuals, we're going to look at whole ecosystems. We want to see balance, but ecosystems have predators and they have prey. Ecosystems have fires and regrowth. Ecosystems go through these things, so as long as humans stay in balance with nature, that we don't overthrow entire ecosystems, then it's okay to eat some meat and to dam a river or to do, right? We can do these things. However, most ecological holists argue humans have gone way too far. We now have factory farming. We've now introduced plants and animals that are not indigenous to ecosystems that are creating all kinds of problems. We've done real damage to rivers through overdamming. Right? So they're arguing that as long as we stayed in balance and proportion, we value creation as though it has some intrinsic worth, but we're looking at the large picture and how things work together, that's fine. But the moment our behavior becomes imbalanced, then it becomes immoral. So again, you can see these various ways of thinking about our responsibility to nature. And we're going to be reading people who hold different views, right? So we're going to be reading an anthropocentrist and a zoocentrist, and we're going to get a sense for how they make their arguments in terms of humans' moral duty or responsibility to creation. The first, and this is the first reading, right, is from William Baxter, titled "People are Penguins." It's a famous article. It's very short, and it's in lots of anthologies and ethics. So the way I want to do this is I'll ask you some questions. I want you to think about it, maybe even jot it down wherever you're at, watching your computer. And then we'll sort of go through some of the answers to get an outline of Baxter's position. So my first question is Baxter anthropocentric, zoocentric, biocentric, or an ecological holist, right? So if you haven't done the reading and you're listening to the lecture, you might want to stop now and do that reading. It's 4 pages, and then come back and it can be more engaging. So is he anthropocentric, zoocentric, biocentric, or an ecological holist? Now I'm going to go back so that you can see the options, right, as they're listed here and defined. We talked about them briefly. So you read the article, you see the definitions here. How would you define or label Baxter? If you need to pause me to think about it more, that's fine. Pause me. I'm going to go back now. Baxter is definitely anthropocentric. For him, only humans have intrinsic value. Only humans have moral status, right? The rest of creation has instrumental value only. The only regard we give to nature, to non-human animals, is the value in terms of how will it impact humans, right? So the article is about penguins. He only cares about penguins to the extent that penguins impact human beings, our overall well-being, our ability to thrive, our ability to flourish as humans. So we should use nature as an instrument in any way that allows human beings to flourish and thrive, because they only have instrumental value. It only has instrumental value. Here are some quotes that help highlight this point. So this is Baxter. The first thing comes from 509 here. It says, every human being should be regarded as an end having intrinsic value rather than as a means to be used for the betterment of another. You should hear Kant in this. When you read this, it should be immediately Immanuel Kant. Treat people as an end, not as a means to an end. Why? Because humans have intrinsic value, therefore they should be treated as an end, right? Each human being should be afforded dignity and regarded equal value, right? So every human is worth the same. Another quote. My criteria are oriented to people, humans, not penguins. Damage to penguins or sugar pines or geological marvels is, without more, simply irrelevant. In short, my observations about environmental problems will be people-oriented. In short, my observations about environmental problems will be people-oriented, as are my criteria. I have no interest in preserving penguins for their own sake, because penguins don't have any intrinsic value. They're only of instrumental value to how they impact humans. Another quote. I reject the proposition that we ought to respect the balance of nature or to preserve the environment unless the reason for doing so, express or implied, is the benefit of humans. So these quotes and others show him to be an anthropocentrist, right? So my next question for you, why is Baxter anthropocentric, right? What justification does he give? Why do humans have intrinsic value and nothing else? So again, think about the article. If you have to look through it, that's fine. But I want you to have a sense of what reasons, right? These are the important moral questions. These are so significant. You can say, oh, humans have intrinsic value. Why? Why do we have intrinsic value? Can you answer that question? The deep moral question. Creation. Yeah, it doesn't have any intrinsic value. It's only instrumentally valuable. That's what Baxter argues. Why? Why do I have intrinsic value and other life doesn't? Can you answer that, right? And so that's what I'm asking. How does Baxter come at these conclusions. Again, if you need to pause me to think about it more, please do, so I'm going to move forward. Here are some quotes. Only humans can be afforded an opportunity to participate in collective decisions. Only humans are aware of the situation. Only humans can cast a vote one way or the other. Only humans have the reason and the problem-solving ability to even understand the moral implications of nature. So humans become the ones with higher moral status. Another quote. If polar bears or pine trees or penguins, like humans, are to be regarded as ends, having intrinsic value, rather than means, having instrumental value only, someone must tell me how much each of these counts. How much does a penguin count? How much does a sugar pine count as compared to a human? Are they equal? Is it 1,000 sugar pines to every human? Is it 5 penguins to every human? Is it equal? How do we do it? So someone must tell me how much each one counts, and someone must tell me how these life forms are to be permitted to express their preferences. Can a sugar pine express preferences? Can a penguin? For I do not know either answer. If certain people are to hold their proxies, are going to make these decisions about the value of animals relative to humans, then I want to know how these proxy holders will be selected. So who's going to decide how valuable a penguin is in comparison to a human? Who's going to cast the penguin's vote as to what they want or what's best for the penguin? Since humans seem to be the only ones that can do this, are humans going to stand in the place of penguins or of trees or of rivers? If so, what humans? Who selects? Who decides? And if we can't answer these questions, his argument is, then you can see why maybe we should just limit our decisions to how humans are impacted. Because we can debate with each other and argue. It doesn't come across as somewhat random or arbitrary. Another quote. Questions of ought, normative questions, are unique to the human mind and world. They are meaningless as applied to the non-human world. Humans are moral creatures because we ask the ought questions. Therefore, we have intrinsic value and we have moral status. The rest of creation cannot ask these questions or even think about them, so they do not have moral status and they do not have intrinsic value. It's instrumental. So that's some of the reasons Baxter gives for why he's anthropocentric. Another question, vital for me at this point in the semester, right? Are his arguments more utilitarian? Are they more deontological? Or are they more virtue-based? So what logic is he using to make his arguments about the environment and our moral obligations to it? Again, think about it. Yeah. Is it categorical imperative stuff? Is it principle of utility stuff? Is he highlighting a few virtues that will sort of direct or guide behavior? If you need to think about it more, pause me, and then I'll move forward here. The clear choice is utilitarian, for the most part. There are some deontological elements which we've touched on. I'll touch on them briefly. But by and large, his argument is just from a utilitarian standpoint, right? So the first thing you need to know, as a utilitarian, what has value for him? Humans. So in every decision, we're going to ask, how are humans affected? And how many humans are going to be affected? Remember the two utilitarian questions, right? Who's going to be affected? In this case, we're not going to count trees or penguins. We're going to only count humans. Who's going to be affected? Human community only. How are humans going to be affected overall? If humans are going to be affected positively overall, and this action will help humans flourish overall, then that's what we do. So building a dam creates jobs, helps the economy, and we can live with the pollution that it creates and some of the fish that are harmed because of it, and it's going to maximize well-being for humans overall, then that's what you do. If factory farming is the way to feed humans and to increase human flourishing overall, then that's what you do. And that's what you write. And we live with some of the pollution. We live with some of the mistreatment of animals because we don't care about that. What we care about is how it impacts the human community. Does it maximize overall well-being or not, right? And you can see his logic throughout, right? So in each decision about the environment, How will this impact humans long term? Okay? So here are some quotes. The right composition of the atmosphere, if we're talking about pollution, is one which has some dust in it, and some lead in it, and some hydrogen sulfate in it. Just those amounts that attend a sensible, organized society thoughtfully and knowledgeably pursuing the greatest possible satisfaction for its human members. So we get a sense that he's limiting his moral decisions to the human community. We're not going to consider creation. It only has instrumental value. And the goal is to maximize overall satisfaction for the human community. That's utilitarian, right? So if we have to pollute the air, we do it. Now, his argument is clear. If we get too much pollution, though, it starts to really negatively impact humans. Well, then we've got to clean up the air, right? Because especially not just for us, but for future generations as well, we've got to leave an inhabitable planet for humans. It's not going to maximize well-being if we all suffocate, or if the quality of air limits our life expectancy to 40 years of age or something. So we care only to the extent that it impacts humans. Another quote that shows he's utilitarian. The key question when it comes to the environment: how do we define and attain the level of pollution that will yield the maximum possible amount of human satisfaction? That's the question we ask in each case, the utilitarian question. Right? On page 511, if you'll turn there, I'm going to read a section. I didn't want to write it out. It's a little bit long for that. But I think it brings the utilitarian point home, right? So 511, middle paragraph on the right-hand column. People enjoy watching penguins. They enjoy relatively clean air and smog-free vistas. Their health is improved by relatively clean water and air. Each of these benefits is a type of good or service. As a society, we would be well advised to give up one washing machine if the resources that would have gone into that washing machine can yield greater human satisfaction when diverted to pollution control. We should give up one hospital if the resources thereby freed would yield more human satisfaction when devoting those resources to eliminating noise of cities. And so on, trade-off by trade-off, we should divert our productive capacities and the production of existing goods and services to the production of a cleaner, quieter, more pastoral nation up to and no further than the point at which we value more highly the next washing machine or hospital that we would have to without than we value the next unit of environmental improvement that the diverted resources would create. So at each step we ask, what would produce the largest increase in human satisfaction? Would it be this one more washing machine, or would it be cleaning up the air? Would it be creating jobs, or would it be pollution? Would it be meat and the dietary benefits of that, or would it be the issues of the animal and how that works, right? So we would want to balance. At what point do we eat so much meat that it's unhealthy to humans? At what point do we treat animals with such disdain that it begins to impact our view of life more generally, and it begins to affect the way we treat humans? We're not considering the animals in and of themselves. It's only how that impacts us, right? So each thing is a trade-off about what would maximize overall well-being. Now, there's some deontology here. So you remember this quote from earlier. Every human being should be regarded as an end rather than a means to be used for an end. This is straight Kant. Humans have intrinsic value. It's the second formulation of the categorical imperative. So you do have a deontological element to his argument in regard to humans and why we should treat humans a certain way and why we should put humans at the center of the moral theory. However, you need to know that his motivation for this deontological principle is utilitarian, right? Why do we treat humanity as an end and not as a means to an end? Because when we treat humanity as an end, it increases overall satisfaction because we start to give people rights. We start to treat people fairly. We start to care about justice. And when we do that, we improve flourishing for the most people. So he doesn't really care about Kant's formulation of the categorical imperative necessarily. He cares about it only to the extent that doing that actually meets the principle of utility. Doing that actually maximizes human well-being overall. All right, final question. is Baxter in favor of abusing the environment, right? You can imagine people reading it and thinking, oh, he doesn't care about animals, he doesn't care about nature. What, people are just going to trash it, cut down trees, spray paint, dump their waste into oceans. This is just opening the door for like horrible environmental mismanagement and abuse, right? So I want to make a few things clear. He is not advocating abuse. In fact, he gives you 4 principles that he's going to operate under, 4 criteria. One of them is waste is a bad thing. Page 508. Don't be wasteful. Okay? So we're not going to just go kill animals for the fun of it and leave them out there. But if eating those animals increases human well-being and flourishing, then we do. Right? That's okay. We're not just going to dump sludge into a river. At some point, that's going to impact humans really negatively. We're only going to dump sewage or waste into a river that's necessary and that's not going to increase negative consequences. We're going to decrease negative consequences overall and increase positive. But we might need to pollute some for there to be jobs. We might need to cut down some forests so that loggers have employment. But we're not going to simply just strip the planet of forests. According to Baxter, we shouldn't. Because at some point, that's going to really negatively affect humans. So he's not for waste, right? This is one of his quotes, right? My argument does not lead to any massive destruction of non-human flora and fauna. This is Baxter. For people depend on these things in many obvious ways. And they will be preserved because and to the degree that humans do depend on them. So we need clean air, we need clean water, we need animals, we need the environment, we need trees, we need all this stuff to survive and to thrive and to flourish. So we're going to care about nature, but only to the extent that we can thrive and flourish. Another quote, what is good for humans is, in many respects, good for penguins and pine trees. Clean air, for example. So that humans are, in these respects, surrogates for plant and animal life. So he's not in favor of abuse or waste or neglect, but he is in favor of valuing it instrumentally only. I hope this is clear that he's an anthropocentrist, a utilitarian, why that's the case. I'm hoping this will provide some clarity. I would love to know what you think as you prepare your reading reflections. How might you engage Baxter? Are you in agreement? Why? Do you think Baxter is compatible with Christian convictions? If you disagree with Baxter, why? Where does he go wrong? Where are some of his premises flawed? Is it incompatible with Christianity for some reason? So I hope you begin to think about some of this critically. If you have any questions at all, please let me know, and I'll look forward to seeing you guys online.